Welcome back to another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and I'm excited for what you're going to hear in today's episode. If you missed last week, you're going to want to go back and listen to it because we've got the same guest coming back today. Susan Neal was on the program last week, and we had an amazing conversation on how to improve your health and weight. It was such a good conversation that after recording, I told my husband, I never ask you to listen to my podcast episodes, but I want you to listen to this one. So if you missed that one, we will put a link in the show notes that you can find at drmichelleb.com. But Susan has a new book out, and I wanted to have a conversation today about how to help our children establish good health and eating habits in this vending machine instant gratification society. Our kids are paying the price. So we're going to talk about that today. But first, I want to give you the same verse I gave you last week because it's so pertinent to our struggle for health and wholeness. It comes from James chapter 4, verse 7, that says, "Submit yourselves to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you." There's a secret, though, to resisting the devil, and that is that you have to first submit to God. And when we're coming to you, asking you to consider ways that you can improve your health and whole being, you first have to submit that to God. Today, we're going to be talking with my friend Susan Neal. She is an author of several books, and we will have all of those listed in the show notes. She's a speaker and a certified health and wellness coach whose background in nursing and health services led her to seek new ways to educate and coach people to overcome health challenges. In the last episode, we talked about some of the health challenges that she had to overcome, but it was pivotal because that really expanded her ministry. She's not speaking as someone who has the head knowledge. She's speaking as someone who's been there. Her passion and mission are to improve the health of others. She's got a healthy living series that's award winning. Included in that are 7 steps to get off sugar and carbohydrates. Let's do that again. 7 steps to get off sugar and carbohydrates. The Christian Study Guide for that book, her Healthy Living Journal, and the Healthy Living series, which are 3 books in one. But her most recent publication is Eat God's Food, a kid's guide to healthy eating. Welcome back to the program, Susan.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Michelle.
We had such a good conversation last week about how to improve our health. But as a mother, I look back and I think, in some ways, I did my kids a disservice. And so when your new book came out specifically for children, I thought that's a conversation we need to have. Will you just briefly, for those who didn't hear the last episode, kind of recap the health journey that took you into this area of ministry?
Yes, so a decade ago, when I was turning 50, I experienced a health crisis. It began with an abscess tooth that I didn't know that I had. And for 9 months, it poisoned my body. I got 10 medical diagnoses, 2 surgeries, and it wreaked havoc on my life and my health. I could barely get out of bed and just had difficulty with activities of daily living. And so I had to overcome those health challenges. I had like 3 different doctors. They helped me, but I also had to seek alternative methods of health and also work on it myself with my food, nutrition, getting rid of a candida overgrowth in my gastrointestinal tract. And so, uh, through that, about 5 years later, I just started a mission to help improve the health of the body of Christ. And what better way to do it than to start with children who, for a picture book from 4 to 8 years of age, to educate them. So that's what I wanted to do through writing my children's book, Eat God's Food.
Will you show that book for our audience that's watching on YouTube? I love it.
Yes, Eat God's Food, a kid's guide to healthy eating.
Love it. Before we really talk about helping our children to establish good health and eating habits, I think we really need to talk about the rate of childhood obesity, at least in the United States. Now, I know not all of my audience is from the United States, but will you talk about what we've seen in terms of those rates in our children?
Yes, so it's 1 in 4 children in the US experience obesity. So overall average, it's 20%. But if you look at those under 5, 2 to 5, it's 13% of those little kids are experiencing obesity. And then after 5 years of age, if a child is overweight in kindergarten, they are 4 times more likely to be obese in 8th grade. I'd love to change that statistic by educating them. And then if you go up for children age 6 to 12, it's 20% of them experience obesity. And then as a teenager, it's 21%. So these are Center for Disease Control statistics from the United States, and it just breaks my heart.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, one of them would be high fructose corn syrup that
I
is
figured.
laced in so many items, and then you don't realize it. And you know what happens when we eat sugary substances is that our taste buds change. And we crave the sugary, oversweet substances. And that's not the way God created our taste buds to taste. And so in my book, can I read a paragraph in my
Sure.
book? So I want to teach these kids. Kids are smart. So it says, once you stop eating junk food, something very interesting happens. With a couple of weeks, your taste buds return to normal, and God's foods begin to taste good again. Take a few bites each time one is served. Natural foods don't have added salt or sugar. Instead, they are full of vitamins and minerals you need.
When we look at those statistics, that only tells a little bit of the story. What type of health issues are related to obesity?
Okay, so for kids, I'll take this by kids and by adults. So for kids, what you have is it's going to increase their chance of getting type 2 diabetes, as it affects their asthma. And anxiety and depression are related to obesity. And then they get a low self-esteem. They may get bullied, so they're having social issues. And that wreaks havoc on their emotional health. And then if that continues into adulthood with obesity, then you have the high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease, type 2 diabetes. Those are the things that you see, I'm sure.
Mm.
Glucose intolerance, insulin resistance, sleep apnea. I've had people who have gotten my book, Seven Steps to Get Off Sugar and Carbohydrates. They lost 25, 30 pounds, and they no longer need their sleep apnea machine. Yeah. Yeah. Fatty liver disease, gallstones, reflux, heartburn. I mean, all of that can relate
So,
to
so
obesity.
many of the major health issues that plague citizens of the United States really can come back to the foods they consume.
Yes, they really can. We can make such a difference in our health and our weight by changing the foods we eat. So we want to go from the processed manufactured foods to God's food.
Yeah. Now, can the obesity rates be decreased through a change in diet?
Absolutely. Diet and exercise are two main factors that can change, yes, the obesity rate. Absolutely. But it's hard to do. It's hard to change. And we
It
talked
is.
about that in the last episode. That's why we need to, employ God's tactics for our help.
And we're going to talk about that more when we come back from break. Friends, we really want to help you, equip you to help your children establish good health and eating habits. And we'll talk about that when we return. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope filled perspective, where today we are talking with my friend Susan Neal, who was a guest on the podcast last week when we talked about how to improve your health and weight. But today we're flipping the switch just a little bit and we're talking about how to help our children establish good health and eating habits. I'm thinking about this as a parent. Well, first of all, if I'm being transparent, I'm thinking about all the ways I messed up as a parent.
Me
So
too.
let's talk about realistically, how does a parent limit the caloric rich sweets and processed foods that our kids become addicted to, just like we adults become addicted to? How do we do that, Susan?
Well, we want to educate. Like for adults, I'd say like one of the second step, first step is to decide, second step is to educate yourself. So again, for kids, you want to educate them. You want to teach them. I remember going to the grocery store and saying to my, 9-year-old daughter, no, we don't want that because that has hydrogenated oil. And you don't want that because that is, causes inflammation. It's unhealthy. And would you believe within 2 years, they made the United States had to have labeling for anything with the hydrogenated fatty oil on it. So it was labeled. And then I was able to show that to my daughter, and she's like, okay.
Maybe mom was smart.
Maybe so. So we want to educate our children. We want to teach them that God's foods are the natural foods that we want them to eat because God created the foods. And I have the Bible verse right here in the book. And, it says, the Lord God planted a garden in Eden. The Lord God caused to grow every tree good for food. So I demonstrate to the kids that, God planted a garden. He was a gardener. He knew what we needed, and He knew we needed a big variety. That's why you have 100 different vegetables to choose from. That's how why you have like 50 different fruits to choose from. He knew we wanted variety. He knew we needed different foods in different seasons. You need the citrus fruit in winter because that's when we need vitamin C to boost our immune system, to prevent COVID, to prevent colds. Yes, he did. So I educate. And then the other thing as a parent to do is to provide the healthy sources of food instead of buying the boxes and bags like I did, because I gave that macaroni and cheese, that
I did too.
processed stuff. Oh my gosh, the potato chips. No, if I had to do it over again, it would be the fruits, the vegetables. So let's go ahead and give them organic strawberries because they're not sprayed with pesticides. Blueberries. Let's make a medley of and hope. One summer, I had my daughters each choose one new fruit all summer long. It was so neat. We got like star fruit and papaya and different things we had never tried, and we got to see if we liked them or not. And so you want to have, one like pomegranate. Have you ever eaten the little seeds in pomegranate? At first, I didn't know if you just sucked on them and spit out the seed or if you crunched them. And you crunch the whole seed, and it is a delightful taste. So, give them fruits, give them slices of celery and carrots, make a homemade guacamole to go with it. How about sugar snap peas? My kids loved sugar snap peas. Maybe plant a little garden outside and have the sugar snap peas grow up and they pick it right off there. My girls would just go right outside for their snack. I even had corn, and the corn was so delicious, the Silver Queen corn, that we would take it right off and we would eat it raw because it was so tender and sweet. So you want to think of ways that you can give snacks and that are that are God's foods. For example, a green apple or any kind of apple and slathered with almond or cashew butter. That's delicious. It has fiber, it's high protein. So we want to explore and give them snacks that God created, not the food manufacturer.
Well, and I think there's something about you mentioned your daughters going out to the garden to pick their snack. But when our kids help plant the garden and pick
Yes.
from the garden, and we get them involved in cooking in the kitchen, they've
Yes.
got a greater interest in those foods that we can bring in.
Oh, they do. And in this book, I have Eat God's Food. I have, after each section, I go into fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, grains, and meats. And after each of those sections, I do a fun activity. And after the fun activity, I do a let's cook section. And so one of them is frozen berries, another one is baking yellow squash, or making homemade almond butter, making a trail mix, because trail mix is great to take when they're on the run with sports. That's a healthy snack on the go. And so I provide little cooking activities as well in this book
Well,
that you, as a parent or grandparent, can do with your child.
such good ideas. Let's talk a little bit about what habits promote the childhood obesity epidemic.
And that is eating those foods that are processed and they're high sugar. And we don't even know that the sugar is in there. For example, with the drinks, you get a soda and it can have from 32 to 64 grams of sugar in one beverage. And the American Heart Association says for adult women, the highest amount of sugar that you should consume is 24 grams. And a kid in one soda is getting over that and potentially double that. So the drinks, and then with those refined carbohydrates, if you're eating, let's say, a bag of potato chips or crackers, that food does not have fiber. And so you crunch it down. Just think in a bag of potato chips, you crunch it down into this little wad. That's it. Okay. So think of eating a baked potato with the fiber. You eat the baked potato and you are full. It has the fiber, your blood sugar does not get spiked. But if you eat the potato chips, it was a small amount of food, there was no fiber, you're still hungry. You can't eat just one, right?
Right.
And you eat the whole bag, you just had a huge amount of calories and fat, and it was not a good, healthy fat. And so that just perpetuates itself. And then the children's taste buds change, and they don't desire the berries and the apples and the sugar snap peas because they're hooked on the sugary refined carbohydrates.
What would you recommend to a parent who really wants to help their children establish good, healthy, and eating habits for breakfast? Because what is advertised are all the things that are not good for them. All these cereals that are high not only in sugar, but the high fructose corn syrup, as well as in the last episode, we were talking about the issues with wheat. So you think, well, toast is a healthier alternative, toast with peanut butter and jelly. And there's lots of reasons why that's not a good breakfast. So, what would you recommend to that busy mom who's trying to get the kids out the door to school on her way to work, rather than stopping at McDonald's or driving through the Starbucks? What can she do to start her kids off on a healthy foot that morning?
Okay. So, um, a gluten-free, organic oatmeal with oats and wheat, if you're going to consume wheat, either one, and corn. You want them to be organic because 85 to 90% of corn, wheat, soy, and oat products, that's corn, wheat, soy, and oat products, are in the United States, are genetically modified, GMO. The seeds have been modified so it's a Roundup ready crop. That means that when Roundup that has glyphosate, that's a carcinogen. We know that's a carcinogen now. Can be sprayed on those crops as much as it is needed by the farmers because those crops are not harmed. So there is an environmental working group out of Washington, D.C., and this group checks the amount of pesticide on the produce. And they did a test about a year and a half ago, and they found like all of the products that were oat products that are then publicized to our children, if they were not organic, they contained some form of glyphosate. That means that we are giving our children a carcinogen in their cereals or oatmeal that contain oats or wheat or corn. This is devastating, and hardly anybody knows about this. The Environmental Working Group creates the Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 lists. And so you look at that, you can buy non organic for the Clean 15, and the Dirty Dozen, you want to buy organic produce, such as strawberries is right, kale is right at the top of the list. Okay, so for oats, you want it to be organic. So make oatmeal and put it with berries. Slice apples inside of it and add some honey. You add some almond milk. So you can do a lot of stuff with oats. In my book, Eat God's Food, I have a recipe which is a quinoa banana uh, oatmeal that you can make. So there's another one. And here in Eat God's Food, we have another recipe for making homemade almond butter. Make the homemade almond butter with the kid. Then they made it. And it's like, oh, I want to eat it now, mom. So that could be for breakfast. And I'll tell you what, you make enough almond butter and it lasts for a couple of weeks. You just put it in your refrigerator. And then another one would be in the book. I have another recipe for homemade granola. Oh my gosh, my daughters love this. They still make it in their 20s, at their own homes. And it's a Granny Sue's recipe. So it's an era it's being handed down from generation to generation. And so it's a delicious recipe that contains dried fruit, organic oats, and nuts and seeds. So many of God's delicious foods. And then we could eat eggs. Eggs, you could boil eggs, you could poach eggs. If you want to have bacon, eat your bacon and eggs. Those are delicious. Yesterday with my daughters, I made bacon and homemade home fries with onions and was absolutely delicious. So it does take more effort to eat that kind of stuff than just a box of cereal. But if on the weekends you were to make the granola and the almond butter, well, you've got those items done for weeks. And so, that's making your own homemade stuff, and then the kids are more apt to want to eat it.
How do we help our kids so that they establish these good health and eating habits, given that so much of the time they're not with us? They go to school, they go to sports events, they go to other people's homes, they go to parties where all this bad stuff is being served. How do we help them there?
Well, what you want to do is one of the recipes in the book Eat God's Food is to have create snack bags. So create your snack bags with your trail mix, with your almonds, with your macadamia nuts, with sunflower seeds, whatever you want. You make your snack bags, you have them. So when it's time to grab and go, you already made those, with your parent. And I'm going to grab one of these, mom, and take it with me for, whatever practice that they're going off to. When I would make my children's lunches, I always included one fresh fruit and one fresh vegetable with whatever else I put in there. And I would make their lunches because the school lunches in here, it's very sad, the school lunches. And when my kids would want fruit roll ups, I would say, I'm not going to give you the fruit roll ups, but I'm going to give you what they make fruit roll ups from. I'm going to give you the real plum or the real peach or the strawberries or the blueberries. I'm going to give you the real stuff, not the fake stuff that the food manufacturer makes. So just by doing that, they're having two fresh servings of a produce every day that you send them to school.
Part of a healthy lifestyle is physical activity. And you and I talked about the importance of physical activity for the dopamine that we get when we talked on the last episode. What are some ways a parent can promote this physical activity in their children who may not be sports inclined and they're living in this technology age?
Right, right. Well, I want to say, as it relates back to health problems with obesity, is that anxiety and depression are associated with the being overweight and obese. And if they're feeling that way, they're not wanting to go outside and do all this kind of stuff. But as a parent, you can demonstrate to them that these activities are fun. So let's plan hiking. I just went on a trip with my daughters, and we every day we picked out a hike. We're going to a waterfall this day. We're going to hike along a river this day. We're going to, hike here this day.
I
We're going
saw
to
those
go.
photos. I wanted to be on that trip.
And then we're going to go to a fruit orchard, and we're picking fresh cherries and peaches and berries, and so, go bicycling with your kids. Promote family fun, physical activities. Go swimming. And then when you're busy as a parent, you've demonstrated to them that it's great to do as a family, but you're busy. And okay, you're going to limit the amount of screen time they have, and you tell them to go outside, go climb a tree, go listen to the birds, go, see how many insects that you can find. Here's a jar, put them in there. How many butterflies did you find? Go get a soft ball and throw it up on the roof and let it bounce on down. Go, shoot some hoops of basketball, get a pogo stick, get a hula hoop, whatever it may be, to promote their own physical activity outside in the sun.
Such good ideas, but you're bringing back childhood memories. Oh my goodness. The hula hoop and the pogo stick were my favorites. What good, wholesome fun.
Yes, yes, it is.
No, playing croquet with your kids in the front yard. There's lots of ideas, but it requires us as parents, whether we're talking about healthy living or we're talking about exercise or moving their body, it requires as parents that we be intentional. As Susan's talking about making the homemade granola or the trail mix or the almond butter, yeah, it takes more work than just going to the store and picking up a processed food off the shelf. But then you know what's going in your children's bodies, and you're helping them learn how to create these healthy habits that they'll take with them once they leave home. Let's talk about some of the benefits of regular physical activity for kids.
Well, the weight just goes down naturally. You know, they're just be getting to their normal weight that they should be. Their muscles and their bones grow strong and they're growing taller instead of wider. And, they're happier. There's less anxiety. There's less moodiness. And the dopamine releases in the brain. They're happier. So it's what God intended for us.
From a mental health perspective, I've seen thousands of kids in my private practice who struggled with depression, with anxiety, with learning issues, with ADHD. And I can tell you that probably without fault, for every single one that I evaluated and diagnosed, one of my recommendations was always physical activity every day. And do not think that gym class counts. I don't even want to go into that, but it's not sufficient. And just for our mood alone, getting your kids out there to play basketball on the driveway or throw a frisbee with you or run with the dog, 10 minutes of that will help lower their stress and anxiety, will improve their mood, and will help them pay attention better. I always told parents when your kids come home, give them a healthy snack, and I did emphasize the healthy, and then get them outside for 10 or 15 minutes before you expect them to sit down and concentrate for another hour or two doing homework because they've concentrated all day. And some
Mm,
of these kids
mm.
just need to run around and expel some of that energy. And some of these kids need the physical exercise, not only for their healthy living, but for their mental well being.
That's such good advice. Great advice.
I guarantee I gave that advice to every parent for every child, bar none. It didn't matter if they came in because they had learning issues or because they had a mood disorder. Friends,
And do you think with those issues they benefit from, staying away from sugar and refined carbohydrates
oh, without a doubt, without
and gluten?
a doubt, yes. When parents would come in, part of my evaluation was to assess what the kids were eating, how much physical exercise they were getting, what other medical conditions they'd been diagnosed with. And I can tell you, usually the evaluations lasted anywhere from 4 to 8 hours in my office. So they were long. And we would have parents bring in their lunch and at least one snack. So I got to see what these kids were eating. I can't tell you the number of times that they brought in breakfast because they didn't eat breakfast before they came in. And their breakfast was a can of soda and a Twinkie or cookies or a cereal bar that was laden with not just sugar, but also high fructose corn syrup. And then we would see the kids bounce off the walls. And I was like, I hardly even need to do the evaluation to know what the issue is. I did do the evaluation, so it was thorough and they would have evidence, but it was very telling. And I was just appalled. And these kids would bring in potato chips, a candy bar, for their lunch with another soda, and very rarely did parents pack more healthy food than unhealthy food. So part of what I had to do was be a health practitioner and educate them on
Yes.
the nutritional requirements for their growing brains.
Yes, yes, their brains. Yes, they need the good fats from the almonds and the avocados and the olive oil and coconut oil. Yes, yes, so much, so
It's
much.
disheartening. It's disheartening. So I'm very much behind your mission to help people improve their health.
Yes, and one of the things I want to tell you that I include in Eat God's Foods are food clue labels. So what I do is I include a label here for a soda and a candy because kids are smart and then they have to hunt and find the unhealthy ingredients: sugar, corn syrup, dextrose, preservatives, artificial flavors and colors or sweeteners. And so they find all this in the food label. And so then when they go to the grocery store and they check, Mom, this has, this artificial flavor, we shouldn't get it, right? They can start being our little police.
Right. What a great idea. Because I
Yes.
didn't start really reading labels until I was middle aged.
Yes. Right. And but kids are so smart. They can pick up things so well. And so many times our children are at the grocery store, I want this, Mom. I want that, Mom. Well, how many grams of sugar does it have? Or look and see. So this equips and educates them so that they can figure it out for themselves.
But the food industry is sneaky.
Mhm.
You and I have talked both last episode and earlier in this episode about looking for the sugar and looking for that high fructose corn syrup. But could you just share for a minute with our parents who are listening, what are other sneaky ingredients? Because they're finding ways around talking about the sugar and the high fructose corn syrup. What else do parents need to be looking for?
Artificial sweeteners, artificial flavors, colors, but it would be natural flavors. Okay. Natural or just flavors. It says natural flavors or it says just flavors. And you're like going, well, what exactly does that mean? Will that mean MSG? It could mean gluten. It's just like, or spices. Well, what kind of spices? Well, it could be monosodium glutamate spices. And so in my book, Solving the Gluten Puzzle, Discovering Gluten Sensitivity, I have a list of questionable foods. And every time I get glutened, in other words, I've gotten some, I don't know where it's from, I come back to this questionable list in my book.
Mhm.
Enzymes, fillers, flavors, natural flavors, modified food starch, rice malt, seasonings, spices, stabilizers, starch. All of those could mean they contain gluten or monosodium glutamate, MSG for flavor, and that messes up brain well. So we're not sure what those names mean.
Parents, I want you to hear we're not bashing you. We're not trying to guilt you or shame you. What we want to do is equip you because the food industry has been lying to us for a very long time. And as a board certified clinical neuropsychologist, I've evaluated thousands of children in my career, usually, or at least much of the time, because teachers have had concerns about learning disabilities, ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, things like that. And I can tell you that before you even go down that route of seeing someone like me or a clinical psychologist, Assess your child's diet, because those parents that I could really sit down and frankly say, look, if you would help change their diet in this way, I think we'd see a lot of these behaviors go away, which means a diagnosis is not warranted. There's not a problem with a diagnosis if it will help your understanding. But too often, a diagnosis is used as an excuse. And I don't like tagging children with labels when there's easy ways that we can get to the root of some of these just by modifying their diet and their physical activity. Too many children are put on medications, in my opinion, that they wouldn't need those medications for if we got back to the basics in their diet, which is why I'm excited about Susan's new book, Eat God's Food, A Kid's Guide to Healthy Eating. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, I'm going to ask Susan to share with you her hope-filled perspective. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your Hope-Filled Perspective, where today we've been talking about how to help our children establish good health and eating habits. Part of the reason why I felt like it was important to have a second episode to talk about this is because in the first episode, and if you missed that, go back and listen to last week's episode. In the first episode, we were talking about how to improve our health and well-being. But the key is that if we had started when we were young eating healthy, we wouldn't have to be trying to fix our health now. So now as parents, we have an opportunity to make a significant contribution to our children's long-term health and well-being by looking at the foods they're eating now. We're going to put all of Susan's resources in the show notes that you can find at drmichelleb.com. But Susan, for the parent who's listening and saying, wow, so maybe if I looked at my child's eating habits and made some changes, maybe that would help their behavior. Maybe it would help their school performance. Maybe it would help their mood. And yet, sitting here as a mom first and a psychologist second, I'm thinking that can be overwhelming. So, what would you say to that parent that they could begin to implement today? Just one small change today that they can be successful with to continue making more changes every other day.
So I would say pack the kids' lunch and include one fresh fruit and one fresh vegetable. When you're giving your kids snacks, what I'd say is make sure it's God's food. Look at the snack. If it resembles what came off of the farm or off the ranch, that's great. If it is put into a square or a triangle or whatever shape or color that is not part of God's food, I would avoid the foods and boxes and bags. And I would educate your child. I'd get the book, Eat God's Food, and educate your child. And in about what foods are healthy and what ones are, and go ahead and cook with them and make some good stuff from the recipes in here. There's simple recipes like popping organic popcorn on top of the stove and putting coconut oil on it, which is sweet and delicious, instead of butter, which would, tends to, promote more heart disease. And in this book, also, there's activities. So, you can do some fun things like with the fun fruit activity. What colors are the fruit? Have they heard of all the fruit? And it does the same thing for vegetables. Have you heard of the 100 different vegetables? And draw them. So it educates them. Kids are so smart. Man, they brains are grow so much. They just absorb so much information. So I would provide for them the healthy God's foods, and I would educate them in reference to what is healthy and what is not.
Good, practical, easy to do suggestions. I love that for the overwhelmed parent who's feeling guilty. There's no guilt, shame, or condemnation, but you have the opportunity now to make some healthy choices that will impact your child for the long term. Susan, if a listener's feeling frustrated in their attempts to help their children establish good health and eating habits, what hope filled perspective will you leave them with today?
I watched a video. It was on Netflix. I forget the name of it, but it was about a child who had a lot of different neurological disorders and autism. And they took a week and got her off of all the processed foods, and she would not make any type of eye contact. And at the end of like a week or two, she starved for like several days. And at the end of a week or two, she started making eye contact with her parents. And you saw this on video with this film. And so there was hope for this child of getting through. And it was from changing her healthy eating habits. And it just demonstrated to me that there is such hope when we do focus on improving our health and well being through our eating, what we eat.
I love that the focus of your book is eating God's foods because God created us. God
Yes.
knows what we need, and God provided such variety to thrill us and delight us.
Yes. He
It
did.
did. It's almost nothing better than a fresh, juicy strawberry picked right off the bush.
Mm-hmm.
I remember
Yes.
going fruit picking with my mother when I was growing up. I ate more of the fruit than I think made it into the basket. And I think they knew that, but I loved it. But it's just like you were talking about, it's eating God's food. Friends, we've had a great discussion today about how to help our children establish healthy habits and good eating habits. I'm going to encourage you to pick up Susan's new book, Eating God's Foods. We will have that in the show notes, as well as all of her other books that we've talked about last episode and this episode. You can find all of those at drmichelleb.com. We will have Susan's website on there, as well as her Facebook group. But if you have friends who are raising little ones, would you consider sharing this episode with them? Because now is the time we can make a significant impact on our children's long term health and well being. Share this episode so that they can be encouraged and find hope for their kids' healthy living. And if you haven't done so, I would encourage you to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode of Your Hope Filled Perspective. And while you're there, would you consider rating and reviewing it? That helps tell other listeners this is a podcast that they would be interested in. We've had a great discussion. If you missed Susan's first episode, go back and listen to that one because that was an awesome episode. And until we meet again next week, it's my prayer for you that you have a hope filled week.